In this video, I'll do a little walkthrough about how Goldstack works. So we can start at the domain goldstack.party, and on this page you can either read some of the information here or go straight to build. In building, what you do is you choose the modules that you want for your starter project. So let's say in my case, I would like to have a Next.js and Bootstrap together with some storage in the back end using S3. So what I do then, I click both of these modules to include them in the project, and the other modules I don't include in the project. If you're unsure whether you use these other modules later, don't worry, you can at a later point go back here and select other modules as well. But in our case here, we have selected these two modules and we are happy with it. So then we can proceed to click here on Configure Project. So now we are in the project configuration wizard, where we need to provide a few basic configuration options that help Goldstack to have our starter project ready for us to use. Most of these are related to being able to roll out the infrastructure for our project, such as the domain name we want to use or the S3 bucket name, etc. The first page here about project, what we would have to do here is to provide the name of our project. So we may just call it Goldstack test. And if you're unsure about what to put into any of these configuration options, there's usually some further information up at the top of the screen. So deployment, that's a little bit of a tricky one. Here essentially we can choose whether we want to configure our starter project to deploy to a development or production system to begin with. If you have like a very small page, it may be worthwhile to go and deploy into production directly. But generally speaking, if you have any more serious project, it's good to start with a deployment into development. And then later we can amend our project configuration to deploy into a production system as well. Next here we have to choose the AWS deployment region that will be used for our primary resources, such as Lambdas or other things that we deploy. And here it's generally well advised to just choose a region that's close to you and your users. So in my case, it may be AP Southeast 2, which happens to be in Sydney, which is close to my current location. So after I've chosen all these, I can go and click Next. And here I start now configuring the first module that I've chosen. So I chose the Next.js plus Bootstrap module, and now I need to provide it with a bit of information here. So this one, the first thing that it asks for here is a hosted zone domain. Now there is actually a guide on the Goldstack documentation that's just about this hosted zone that I would encourage you to have a look at when you're not so sure about what this means. But essentially we need to provide here a domain name that's configured on AWS Route 53 that will include the domain that we want to deploy our website under. So in my case here, I may use the domain goldstack.party, which I happen to have configured as a Route 53 hosted zone. Now, the primary website domain, that's the domain that users should actually be able to access my my website on. So I may call this gettingstarted.goldstack.party. And the redirect domain is something that we have to configure that is essentially a secondary address under which you can reach this application we are deploying, and it will do nothing else. But whenever some user goes to this particular address, the user will be redirected here. And it's usually a good place to put something like www at front. Default cache duration, that is something that we'll configure on AWS CloudFront, and it essentially means if we don't specify any other way, how long should resources that we deploy be cached on the user's side. And so when we say 10 seconds here, that would mean that if a user accesses our site, it may take up to 10 seconds until they see an update that we deploy. So for a development system, 10 seconds here is just fine. But for production systems, you may want to use a little bit higher cache duration because that can increase performance for users. Environment variables, we don't really need to worry about at this point in time. It is essentially front-end specific environment variables that we want to provide to our applications. That would be something like a full story API key or a Google and a Google AdWords identifier, things like that. This is, like if we choose different modules, we would have different things to configure here. And generally speaking, we would have a little bit of documentation at the top of the module that will tell us more about these options that we need to configure. But that really depends on which module we are including in our project. And in our case here, we included a Next.js application. Therefore, we need to provide all this information. Now, the next module that we have chosen is the S3 module. This allows us to just store some data in an S3 bucket. And what we need to do here is just provide a bucket name. Now we just need to know that this bucket name needs to be globally unique. So for instance, if we call this here my bucket, that will probably not work because somebody may have already been so smart and have created that. Instead, we could get username here like something getting started Goldstack, which in all likelihood is not really used by anyone. So that's an easy to configure module. We can just now continue on. Now, here in the next section, we can provide an AWS access key and an AWS secret access key. Providing this here is really the easiest way to get started. However, if you are dealing with a very sensitive system that has lots of critical user data and you really want to only use best security practices for it, then I would say maybe to skip on providing the AWS access key and AWS secret access key here, but do so at a later point. But if you're just starting a new account with where just this application will live in, it's probably okay to provide these AWS access key and AWS secret access key details here. And on how to obtain these details, we have another guide that deals with just this question. So I would encourage you to have a look at that as well if you are unfamiliar with these concepts. Here in the case of the video, I'll provide these off screen, so I won't be getting them now. But just imagine we are providing the correct information here. Now we go to the last page of the configuration wizard here, which gives us essentially an overview of all the steps in the configurations that we have undertaken and whether we have provided all the information that is required. And we have done so in our case, and this will enable us now to proceed with building our project. If you see a red X here, then just go back to the specific module or the project page, and you can then provide the correct information, or which will then enable you to flip this over to green and then eventually build the project. And now we are building the project. And now we can choose here from, or not really choose, but it presents us with the pricing options. Currently, as of making this video, there is a $20 fee for getting one template of Goldstack, and this will actually enable you to create and download as many templates as you like for 30 days. Later we may add different options here, and we also often have coupons and things like that that you can find on our online presence. So in our case here, we just select this $20 here, and now we need to provide our email address and an optional coupon code and confirm to the terms and conditions. Just provide an email address here, agree to the terms and conditions, and then we click submit. And we'll be forwarded here to Stripe that we use to process our payments. So we'll actually never see your credit card information or any of the other CVC or expiry date of your credit cards. That's all handled by Stripe. Now in this video, I'll just be providing this information offline and proceed to the next step. Yes, and the next step after we have completed the purchase will already be to download our template. And we can download the template just by clicking the download button here, which will yield us a zip file that we can extract and then start developing our project that I'll show in a little while here. Just to note here on this page, we have the option here to get to getting started guides that are specific to the different modules that we chose, as well as a general getting started guide for the project. And here I would always recommend to start with a general getting started for the project and then drill into the individual modules that we have selected here. So this is really like a step-by-step guide to get up and running with your project. But I'll show this here now as well after extracting the project. But before we check out the downloaded archive, we just have a quick peek in our email. And what we should have received here is an email with a Goldstack template purchase. And that includes a link that you can use to re-download your project if you like, and also to create other templates for the next 30 days. So if we go on this link and then we click on create another template, and then we choose new modules here, go again into configure project, we can configure our project, and at the end of this process we won't have to enter our credit card details again. We just select here the 1 month's pricing option again, and where we'll get sent to is directly to the download page. Now I've also extracted my package that I've downloaded and opened it in VS Code. And the first thing that we'll want to do here is just open a terminal. We say just go here, open new terminal. And we just need to make sure here that we have the correct versions of things. So I would recommend you to do a node -v, and we should have at least node version 12. Otherwise, nothing will really work very well. And we also need to have yarn installed in the correct version, which should be higher than 1.5, I believe. You can look that up in the documentation. But anyway, so after we have downloaded our project, all we need to do is check that we've got the right versions of things installed, and if not, install node and install yarn and install Docker as well. Oh, I did that one wrong. So Docker doesn't need to be a particular version, but it's just recommended that we have it, or required that we have it installed. But now If we have all the dependencies installed, we can just run yarn here, and that will download all the dependencies for our projects and get everything ready for us. So if everything went to plan, we should have received a message such as this, done with warnings. In my case here, it took around 1.5 minutes to get the project initialized, which is mostly due to a lot of dependencies having to be downloaded for Next.js. But after we have done that, it's time to get VS Code ready. Now, what we really want to make sure that we use is ESLint, which is all configured for us in the project already. So we can click here on the ESLint and click Allow Everywhere. And likewise, we want to use the VS Code TypeScript integration that can be triggered by going into any of the projects and finding a TypeScript file. And when we open the first TypeScript file, it will ask us, this workspace contains a TypeScript version, so further and so on. And we just click Allow. And now we should have something here, either called TypeScript or TypeScript React, and some version number and PNP down here, plus ESLint and Pretty as well. That means we are all set up and ready to start coding. Now, in order to deploy infrastructure for our modules, we can just find them here under packages. Let's see, here is our one for the S3 module. So we right click on that, say open integrated terminal. And now we just run yarn infra up, and then either dev or prod, depending on what we chose during configuration. I chose dev, so I'm just gonna issue here yarn infra up dev, run that. And this will now initialize Terraform, do a Terraform plan, and then a Terraform apply. And at the end, our infrastructure should be all up and running. So once this operation is completed, we should be receiving a number of outputs here that show us the S3 bucket. And we should see the S3 bucket being created on AWS as per our configuration when setting up the project. I do the same for the Next.js Bootstrap project as well. Open an integrated terminal and then run yarn infra up dev. And this will just take a little while longer due to the way that AWS provisions the infrastructure, especially things like an SSL certificate that we get and rolling out the CloudFront distributed CDN. Now, after a good 4 to 5 minutes, all the infrastructure for the Next.js application would have been stood up. All we need to do now is actually deploy our application as well, which is also very easy. We just go yarn deploy dev, and this will package up, minify, do whatnot to our Next.js application, and then upload it to the AWS infrastructure we have just stood up. This usually shouldn't take longer than a minute or so. And after we have done this deployment, we can now check out our website. And if we forgot which domain we selected or other things that we configured, we can easily find that under the specific package. Let's say for the Next.js Bootstrap one, we can go here into goldstack.json. And here we see what website domain and website redirect domain we have configured. So now what I'll do here is copy this domain and just go to Google, enter this domain with HTTPS, that's the front, and I see here my Next.js application. So getting an initial version deployed is very easy, but when we later have updates, we can also deploy these quite quickly. We'll just enter another one, yarn deploy dev. In this sense, we don't have to deploy our infrastructure again, unless, of course, we change something in the Terraform configuration. Apart from that, we can also do other things, such as using yarn watch for local development and a whole bunch of other commands as well. Now, in this particular example, because we are kind of just playing around with the getting started project, we can also issue another infrastructure command here, which is just yarn infra destroy dev, which will clean up after the environment that we have created, which can be especially useful for development systems. And yeah, and that's it for giving a little bit of an overview of how Goldstack works. I would recommend to have a look at the specific getting started guides for the modules that you've chosen, and also for the project in general, if some of these things were a little bit quick in this video. And of course, if you have any questions, to get in touch with us.